As the USS George H.W. Bush hurriedly crossed the Mediterranean to rendezvous with the USS George Washington and USS Abraham Lincoln in Middle Eastern waters, the question arose, was this first gathering of 3 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers since the 2003 Iraq War intended to demonstrate overwhelming military might, or to urgently patch holes in a protracted, quagmire-like war of attrition? Many observers, witnessing the spectacle of 3 supercarriers converging on the Middle East, instinctively assumed the U.S. was poised to launch another crushing military campaign. Yet as the front lines stretched and battle reports emerged, the urgent deployment of the $13 billion USS George H.W. Bush revealed an unprecedented embarrassment and passivity for U.S. forces in the Red Sea and Arabian Sea. The story begins with the performance of the USS Ford. This most advanced carrier in the U.S. fleet, boasting a hefty price tag and cutting-edge technology, fell silent early in the conflict. While jokes circulated, some even mocking the ship's notorious toilet malfunctions, the reality was far more tense than any anecdote. After transiting the Suez Canal into the Red Sea, the Ford faced not a conventional navy, but missile and drone threats launched by Houthi militants. While the U.S. military framed this as a strategic adjustment, the battlefield reality revealed that deploying 3 carriers, a rare move, was more a sign of desperation. The USS Abraham Lincoln had been struggling in the northern Arabian Sea for days, with 9 days of intense operations pushing the carrier and its strike group to their limits. An aircraft carrier's ammunition stores are not bottomless pits. Continuous launches of standard series missiles to intercept incoming threats rapidly deplete precious precision munitions. Iran's deployment of drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles in successive waves imposes staggering costs on the U.S. military to intercept these weapons. Reports indicate the Lincoln had suffered a close-range sneak attack. While the U.S. military did not publicly acknowledge it, their actions spoke volumes. The carrier was forced to retreat over 1,000 kilometers. This 1,000-kilometer distance has now become the U.S. Navy's safety red line for aircraft carriers. Iran's anti-ship ballistic missiles and hypersonic weapons developed in recent years are no longer prototypes but combat-ready systems. News of Iran's missile launch against the Lincoln shocked the international community. Though the missiles missed their target, the intent to strike was unmistakable. Compounding U.S. concerns, the THAAD system radars deployed in the UAE and Jordan were also precisely targeted. Under these circumstances, no matter how resolute the U.S. military may be, it dare not risk placing a multi-billion-dollar carrier within enemy missile range. The withdrawal of the USS Abraham Lincoln marks a symbolic turning point. For the first time, America's maritime dominance in the Middle East has been cornered by land-based firepower. Previously, an aircraft carrier's proximity to coastlines served as a deterrent. Now, carriers must retreat thousands of miles offshore to feel secure. This red line drawn by missiles is rewriting the rules of modern naval warfare. Thus, the arrival of the USS George H.W. Bush carries additional significance. It is not here to expand an advantage, but to fill a gap. Frontline ammunition depletion was accelerating, personnel were exhausted, and defensive networks were showing cracks. Without urgently deploying a new carrier strike group, the entire deployment risked collapse. While 3 carriers might appear formidable, their movements were in fact a series of reactive fixes. The USS Ford must hold the Red Sea, the USS Lincoln withdrew deep into the Arabian Sea for rest and refit, and the USS George H.W. Bush rushed in to fill the gap. This triangular formation, while tight, is a series of responses to an increasingly passive situation. What's even more embarrassing than the tactical gains and losses is America's massive economic drain. The renowned Washington think tank CIS, using Pentagon data, calculated that the daily cost of U.S. military operations in the Middle East reaches $891.4 million. In the first 4 days of the conflict alone, the U.S. military burned through $3.7 billion. The operational costs of aircraft and warships were staggering, with tanker and transport aircraft alone consuming $9 million daily. Every year flown by mainstay fighters like the F-35 and F-15, represented a substantial sum of money going up in smoke. During a closed-door briefing to Congress, U.S. Defense Department officials disclosed that the military's spending had already surpassed $11.3 billion within the first 6 days of the operation. This figure does not include prior investments made to assemble troops and equipment before hostilities commenced. Upon hearing these numbers, lawmakers anticipate the Pentagon will soon submit an emergency funding request potentially reaching $50 billion. What's even more baffling is the staggering disparity in the cost of offense versus defense. Iran's suicide drones deployed on the battlefield cost a mere $20,000 to $30,000 each. Dubbed the AK-47 of the skies, they are cheap yet effective, relying on sheer numbers to achieve victory. To intercept these low-cost drones, the U.S. military must resort to the Standard 3 missile, priced at nearly $10 million per unit, or the Patriot 3 missile costing $3.8 million each. The cost disparity between the two systems is staggering, a 70-fold difference. Using such expensive munitions against such inexpensive drones is unsustainable for the U.S. no matter how deep its pockets run. Iran has now deployed over 2,000 drones, placing increasing pressure on U.S. interception efforts and driving up costs. With frontline ammunition reserves critically low, the Pentagon urgently requested supplemental funding from Congress to address the gap in weapons and munitions. However, America's fiscal condition simply cannot sustain such global military ventures. By February 2026, the federal government's national debt had surpassed $38.8 trillion, with annual interest payments alone nearing $970 billion. The fiscal year 2026 defense budget stood at $1.01 trillion, with the Trump administration planning to increase this figure to $1.5 trillion by 2027, a rise exceeding 50%. With the national debt continuing to balloon, forcing through military spending hikes at this juncture amounts to borrowing new debt to repay old debt, only widening the fiscal deficit further. The Trump administration held multiple meetings with defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing, explicitly demanding a twofold increase in missile and conventional ammunition production capacity to rapidly replenish frontline consumption. To fund this massive military expenditure, the White House began slashing domestic spending, overseas military base maintenance costs were cut, military recruitment was suspended, and a number of non-core weapons R&D projects were halted. The savings were channeled entirely into the Middle East theater. While this conflict has made U.S. defense contractors rich beyond measure, ordinary citizens bear the cost. Domestic opposition to the war intensified. A Reuters Ipsos poll revealed only 27% of Americans supported the government's military operations in the Middle East. Trump had intended to divert domestic attention from issues like the national debt, inflation pressures, and legal disputes through foreign conflict, hoping a swift military victory would boost his midterm election prospects. Instead, the U.S. became mired in the Middle Eastern quagmire. The more resources poured in, the more passive the situation became. A notable shift emerged in this conflict. The operational objectives of the U.S. and Israel began diverging markedly. Initially, both sides maintained a unified stance, declaring their intent to pursue regime change in Iran. But soon, the U.S. official narrative shifted, abandoning the call for regime change, and instead stating its goal was to weaken Iran's military capabilities and prevent it from acquiring nuclear weapons. Israel, however, refused to accept this. Netanyahu insisted on overthrowing the current Iranian regime, even publicly urging Iranian citizens to take to the streets against their government. For Israel, this war is a matter of survival, potentially the last chance for the 77-year-old Netanyahu to eliminate the Iranian threat. Yet the U.S. is unwilling to be buried alongside Israel's ultimate goal, seeking only to end the conflict swiftly and minimize losses. Israeli intelligence has uncovered covert U.S.-Iranian contacts. Despite the White House's strenuous denials, the rift between allies is now impossible to conceal. The deployment of the USS George H.W. Bush marks not a prelude to victory, but the shift from limited punishment to endless attrition. What the U.S. anticipated resolving in days has, by the ninth day, necessitated escalating troop reinforcements. The more troops deployed, the deeper the entanglement. Unable to retreat, unable to win, unable to sustain. This is the stark reality facing U.S. forces in the Middle East. Ultimately, victory will not be decided by aircraft carriers or missiles, but by national strength, endurance, and clear-headed strategic judgment. By tying its fate to Israel's chariot and charging blindly into a minefield, America risks draining even its deepest reserves.